Cape Centaur, a pinned castle by the bay. With permission from the author James Dawson, owner of the Unicorn Bookshop in Trapp, Maryland. His article on the Stuart Castle is narrated here along with colorized photos from the time the property was built. First published in the Tidewater Times, March 2018. Two of the most interesting people ever to move to Talbot County must have been Glenn and Jacqueline Stewart, who came here in 1922. For starters, they built a castle on their waterfront estate, raised Irish Wolfhounds, tried to buy up White Island and cruised the waterways in their 80-foot luxury schooner that was painted black. Boyd Gibbons detailed their story in his fascinating book White Island, which came out in 1977, and while this article is in his debt for the first-hand accounts he recorded, even more amazing material has come to light since then. Truth was definitely stranger than fiction when the Stuarts were involved. It's hard to decide which Stuart was the more fantastic. Of the many stories told about Jacqueline, probably the only one that might not have been true was that she dyed her poodles to match the interiors of her latest Cadillacs. Still, it was hard to top tales about Glenn, who mysteriously sailed away in his yacht captained by Al Capone's ex-skipper, never to be seen again, or so that story went. That one is mostly true, so let's start with Glenn. Glenn L. Stewart was born in 1884, the only child of Pittsburgh millionaire David G. Stewart, who made his fortune as a wholesale grain merchant and went on to become a bank president and civic leader. Young Glenn, however, was more of a playboy than a budding industrialist. Calling himself the Count, Glenn was not liked in college, and a female acquaintance from Vassar stated flat out that he was a liar, a womanizer, and a no account. Standing at an imposing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing 250 pounds, the moustache Glenn Stewart was a very striking individual, even if you discounted the black eye patch he sometimes wore and the rather nasty scar on his cheek. While he said that he got the scar fighting a duel at Heidelberg, the truth was that when he was in college, he was angry that some young women had spurned him to attend another party. Glenn was making a bomb to blow up the tracks to derail their train, but it exploded, prematurely blinding him in one eye and scarring his cheek instead. This was probably the mysterious illness that Stewart had gone to Florida to recover from. He dropped out of both Harvard and Yale to travel the world before somehow landing a job as a fourth-class secretary with the U.S. Diplomatic Service. It was said that he had no more abilities as a diplomat than as a scholar, but until he was fired in 1920 he was pretty good at getting the government to pay for his travel expenses, especially since they didn't know where he was half of the time. Jacqueline Archer Stewart was even more elusive than Glenn, if that's possible. Version 1 of her origin story is that she was born in Ireland in 1887, attended fancy schools in Paris and moved to New York. Version 2 claimed that she was an Irish heiress who was raised on Indian reservations in America while traveling with her father Lord Archer, who was a missionary. Incredibly, both of these versions seem to be partially true, as she was the daughter of the Reverend Dr. William C. Archer, a native of Newcastle, Ireland, who was a writer and lecturer who had done missionary work in the American West for nearly 60 years, but the truth is she was born in Kansas. Somehow she and Glenn met and were married in New Haven on December the 22nd, 1919. The bride was still in mourning for her father, who had died that August. Glenn's first wife Greta Hosteta had died during an influenza epidemic after 4 years of marriage. Both of Glenn's wives were thought to be good catchers. The Stuarts spent Christmas with his family before going to the Orient on their honeymoon, where Glenn would be attached to the embassy in Tokyo. Back home, the couple was soon embroiled in controversy. Son hid father's will, judge rules, trumpeted Reading Times. When Stewart found out that his ailing millionaire father intended to leave some of his estate to several charities, he stole the will and hid it in his safety deposit box. Actually, while one article said that Glenn had been aided in this endeavor by his wife Jacqueline, another stated that she had instigated it. When his father died in June 1923, Glenn stated that because there was no will, he would inherit everything as the only living heir. Somehow they were found out and a suit was brought against Stewart by two of the charities involved, the Children's Hospital and Episcopal Church Home, along with several other heirs, and the matter went to trial. Mrs. Stewart's testimony was contradicted by every other witness. The court's decision was devastating. As reported in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on February the 22nd, 1924, Judge Trimble ruled that Glenn had been easy prey for the cunning of his wife. Furthermore, while Stewart's father was being tended by nurses in Pittsburgh, her actions at their home in Maryland was all false pretense, insincerity, sham, and matchless impiety. She had only one purpose in view, and that was that her husband might inherit this estate absolutely, and that she would be vested with the 1/2 interest therein on his death. The judge also chastised the couple for attending a football game and taking a trip to New Mexico when they were supposed to be caring for the dying man. The court ordered Stewart to produce the will, but maybe it was unfair of the judge to blame everything on Jacqueline. Perhaps he had cut Glenn some slack because of the Stewart family connections in Pittsburgh. After all, Anyone who would try to blow up train tracks might not have needed much encouragement to defraud an estate. The Stuarts' home in Talbot County was named Cape Centaur, after the Archer family coat of arms, which pictured a centaur shooting an arrow. It was emblazoned on the gatepost at the entrance to the estate, along with the motto Sola Bene Honesta, or honesty above all. The irony of that motto was not lost on Judge Trimble, who mentioned it in his summation. While living in Washington, D.C., between diplomatic postings, Stewart had become interested in a property, in a part of the beautiful 900-acre Fairview estate, on a secluded point of land at the mouth of Leeds Creek on the Miles River, because of the opportunities it offered for hunting, fishing and sailing. When he showed it to Jacqueline, she is supposed to have said, "If you build me a castle, I will live there." So he purchased 275 acres of the estate in May 1922 for $830,000 and built Jacqueline her castle. The architect was Bradley Delahanty, and the castle was a prime 1920s version of 13th century Moorish architecture. An American Alhambra for roaring 20s royalty. Stevenson and Cameron of New York had the contract to build the dwelling, which cost about $100,000. While its turrets, towers and roof tiles were more typical of Spain or California than the Chesapeake Bay area, there was no mistaking it for any other house around, especially since it was plastered in rose-colored stucco rubbed on by hand, earning it the nickname the Pinned Castle. Actually, the color was more of a desert dawn, and the roof tiles were red. Furnished with exotic antiques, it was quite a showplace. The Cortes room boasted hand-painted murals by Victor White featuring Cortes' conquest of Mexico, which included an Aztec sacrifice scene. That was Jacqueline's room. Another eye-opener was the boxwood swastika in the garden. Now, to be fair, before the Nazis ruined it, the swastika was a perfectly acceptable good luck symbol that had been used in ancient times. The swastika remained on the grounds into the 1990s, but is now gone. Casting about for something to do, Jacqueline decided she wanted to breed dogs, but not just any dogs. She chose Irish Wolfhounds because, as she wrote in her article in the June 30, 1925 issue of the American Kennel Gazette, the Wolfhound was a symbol of royalty and the rich. He is a rich man's dog, and must have outdoor space. It costs a great deal to feed and to care for him properly. A poor man should not attempt his care, any more than he would try and keep a Rolls-Royce on a Ford car income. Not satisfied with just any Irish Wolfhound, Jacqueline went on a quest to find one worthy of her attentions and finally purchased Ballyshannon in Essex, England, for $1,250. Weighing in at 185 pounds and standing 38 inches tall at the shoulder, Ballyshannon was said to be the largest Irish Wolfhound bred in modern times. He was named for the Irish Wolfhound, who was a Red Cross war dog hero in the Great War. A photograph of Ballyshannon with his huge paws resting on Mrs. Stuart's shoulders and gazing soulfully into her eyes might just as well have been of a pony leaning against a child. She even had a full-length portrait of herself and Bally painted by Beltran Masses, the court painter of Spain, that hung in the Great Hall at Centaur Castle. Jacqueline's article included photos of Ballyshannon, Sinn Féin and their many puppies. It also detailed the special diet prepared by her live-in kennel master and his wife, who were on call 24 hours a day. Feeding nearly 30 Irish Wolfhounds was like cooking for a small army. The dogs dined on 75 pounds of ground lean beef, 50 pounds of cut beef, and 8 gallons of soup daily. Fresh bread was baked every other day, and 900 pounds of cornmeal were used in a month, the dogs eating out of small wash tubs for bowls. No candalpa for the Stuart hounds. Jacqueline Stewart's dogs ate very well. And they lived in luxury, too, in a special kennel on the estate shaped like a tower. At $500 a pop, Ballyshannon would make $10,000 in stud for Mrs. Stewart until his death 1926. She had him stuffed and sent to the American Museum of History, where he was on exhibit for years before disappearing into the museum's storage area. In 1926, movie idol Rudolph Valentino purchased a Wolfhound from the Stuarts for $5,000. Rudy planned to take the one-year-old Centaur Pendragon to Hollywood and train him for the movies. Jacqueline also raised bad-tempered chows, which she dressed in children's clothes so she could sneak them on trains with her, so they wouldn't have to stay in the baggage car. Always obsessed with travel, Glenn spent increasing amounts of time away from home. One of the few photos ever published of him in a 1928 newspaper article showed him standing next to his $20,000, 4-ton, 24-foot-long motorhome that was said to be one of the most luxurious in the country. Built in England and mounted on an Rio truck chassis, it boasted, among other amenities, walnut paneling, mauve and gold silk upholstery, a kitchenette, real beds and a working shower in the blue and white tiled bathroom. And, of course, a gun cabinet, because Stewart planned to use his land yacht on a hunting trip to the Rockies. Glenn carried as much as $500,000 for traveling expenses in an aluminum suitcase with holes drilled in the sides so the money wouldn't overheat and catch fire. When he was hunting at home, Glenn built a fortified brick hunting lodge at Cape Centaur that he called his duck house. It also had a concrete bunker underneath it that was reached by a secret door. Another of Stuart's passions was luxury automobiles, and at various times he owned a 1926 Packard Straight A 243 LeBaron 7-passenger limousine, the kind where the chauffeur sits up front, more or less exposed to the weather. Then he had a Duesenberg that he traded in on Accord, another flashy upscale automobile. When the Accord somehow got damaged, he traded it for a single .31 Duesenberg. Costing tens of thousands of dollars, the Duesenberg was probably the fastest and most jaw-dropping of all luxury automobiles made in America at that time. Glenn also loved sailing. In 1930, he and Wright and Owl Tripp recreated some of Columbus' Caribbean voyages in his 64-foot auxiliary ketch, Centaur. The Centaur was all black, with black sails. Meanwhile, not content with Wolfhounds, the Stuarts also raised Percheron horses and Hereford cattle, and tried to buy out the entirety of nearby White Island for these endeavors. When one resident refused to sell, Mrs. Stuart threatened him, saying that she would get him off that island, but she never could. The Stuarts were never able to buy up all of White Island, but they hired real Wild West cowboys to patrol the grounds, scare off intruders and intimidate the few residents who dared remain there. Mrs. Stuart had money and power, and used them both to her advantage. Her personality was overwhelming, and her perfume was overpowering. Or maybe it was the other way around. In any event, like her pinned castle, Jacqueline Archer Stuart dominated the landscape. In 1931, work was started on a 30-foot square, 3-story medieval English castle addition to the Moorish castle already on site. William Bricklow was the architect. This new castle featured turrets at each corner and a working portcullis to lower at night. Construction was completed in November 1934. Secrecy reigned at Castle Centaur. Locals said that Stuart kept changing carpenters and painters so that no single workman would know the complete layout of the house. There was also a gatehouse with an armed sentry at the entrance, and a security fence ringed the property. Both Stuart and Adolf Pretzler, live-in chauffeur and bodyguard, slept with loaded Colt 45s under their pillows. The place was more of a fortress than a house. Normal houses don't usually have a portcullis, armed cowboys and snarling Irish wolfhounds patrolling the grounds. Years later, a secret room filled with bushel baskets full of coins and jewelry was found in the basement under Glenn Stewart's dressing room. The duck house had likewise been stocked with money and ammo in case of enemy attack. At one time, there was said to have been $1.6 million in change stashed around the estate. Mr. Stewart wasn't taking any chances with intruders, but as the judge had hinted in 1924, perhaps the person he had to fear the most was Mrs. Stewart, who was already in the house. Then there was the ongoing and very messy custody trial of the century-over-11-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt, to whom Jacqueline Stewart was godmother. After Gloria's father, Reginald Vanderbilt, drank and gambled his way through his $15.5 million inheritance and died of cirrhosis of the liver at age 45, his wife, Gloria M. Vanderbilt, was angry that her daughter little Gloria, not her, would inherit $2.5 million from an inviolable family trust. Gloria M., who had been under the age of 21 when her daughter was born and Reggie had died, filed a court petition seeking official guardianship of her child whom she rarely saw. This prompted her sister-in-law, Gertrude Whitney, who was little Gloria's aunt, to bring suit against her, claiming that she was an unfit mother. Witnesses testified about the scandalous goings-on, which included her reading vile books and playing naked poker with various friends. When Gloria M. found out that even her own mother, Mrs. Laura K. Morgan, had testified against her, she cut off all financial support to her mother that had been her only income. When she discovered that Jacqueline Stewart had begun secretly supporting her mother, Gloria M. spread rumors that Jacqueline had been a showgirl, and probably was responsible for some of the out-of-state crank letters that Jacqueline had been receiving. Gloria M. lost the suit, her daughter was erased by her aunt, and the whole sordid affair was the subject of a TV miniseries Little Gloria. Happy at last in 1982. Meanwhile, back at Cape Centaur, in the years leading up to World War II, Glenn Stewart was becoming increasingly paranoid that someone would kidnap or kill him, and had Pretzler check the house and grounds each night to make sure there were no assassins lurking in the topiary. This went on until one day, suddenly and without warning, Glenn Stewart sailed away in his big black yacht, never to be seen again, or so the story went. In fact, he had gone to Miami. Stewart deeded Cape Centaur and his other properties to Jacqueline in 1934, and the two divorced in Dade County, Florida, in 1945. It was a messy divorce with suits and countersuits. Glenn Stewart, whose occupation was described as a stock operator, stated that even though he had spoiled his wife with gifts of $100,000 in securities and homes and property in Talbot County in Miami, he claimed that when he came back from a European trip, he discovered that Mrs. Stewart had given her affections to someone else for whom she had bought formal clothes, dined and danced with, and moved him into a wing of the main house. The court decided that both parties were at fault. So, why had he gone to Miami? It was probably a woman. Glenn Stewart died on November 5, 1957, and was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery, West Palm Beach, Florida. He rests there with his third wife, Palm Beach artist Jessie Chardin Stewart. Their epitaph reads, "We lived joyously and loved each other dearly," hinting at more Stewart mysteries. Jacqueline Archer Stewart, late of Dade County, Florida, died on February 29, 1964, also in Miami. It is not known why her place of residence is given as Dade County, Florida, or what attraction Florida had for both Glenn and Jacqueline. Jacqueline Stewart died without a will, but Pretzler, who was the estate manager by then, presented some documents stating that Jacqueline had left Cape Centaur to him. Whatever happened, there was some legal wrangling until Jacqueline's heirs agreed on August 20, 1964 to give 28% of the estate in Cape Centaur to Pretzler. He would live there for many years until death in 1992. The Stewarts had no children, and it was said that Pretzler had been like an adopted son to Glenn Stewart. Jessie Chardin Stewart died in 1980 and left almost $500,000 from the Glenn Stewart Irrevocable Trust to establish an animal hospital. It was perhaps the only money from the Glenn and Jacqueline Stewart fortune spent on charity instead of castles and cars. Cape Centaur is still privately owned and off limits. The interior is a true time capsule, with seemingly all the Stewarts' furniture and memorabilia still in place. The last mystery of all maybe not be the black eye-patched, mustached Glenn Stewart, who sailed off into the sunset never to return, but Jacqueline Stewart herself. Although it is assumed that she is buried in Florida, no one knows for sure. Or, even exactly where she was born, for that matter. But no one here will ever forget that Jacqueline Archer Stewart had once lived in Talbot County, in a pinned castle by the bay.